So it is 13 days since the war began. At least about 1,400 Israelis are dead. Close to 4,000 Palestinians have been killed in this campaign of relentless air bombings that Israel has unleashed ever since this war began. An estimated 200 Israelis, many of them soldiers, at this moment are held captive in the custody of Hamas. But the question is this: what really is the end game of all this? Maybe it is still too soon at this moment to speculate. Both sides have not charted out as to what they are trying to achieve. So let's take a look as to where the two sides stand. Let's consider the case of Israel first. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's facing a lot of criticism back home, has pledged to try and wipe out Hamas. And this is all that we know about Israel's plan of action. Israel has not put out any plan of action as to how it intends to bring back the captives who are presently in the custody of Hamas. Now, it's got an interesting operation. It's codenamed as Operation Iron Swords. It is proving to be the most brutal campaign that Israel has unleashed on Gaza, much worse than anything that Israel has carried out in the past. Now, Israel at this moment has mobilized an estimated 360,000 soldiers and reservists for a potential ground incursion into Gaza. This, to put it in context, is more number of soldiers than what Russia had mobilized when it invaded into Ukraine at the beginning of the invasion. Now, these numbers should give you a glimpse of what Israel's strategy at this moment is, backed by the Americans. Three regional officials familiar with the discussions between the United States and the West Asian leaders have claimed that the state of Israel wants to destroy Gaza's infrastructure completely, even if it comes at the cost of tremendous civilian casualties. Because Yoav Gallant, the defense minister of Israel, has stated in his press briefing that it is not looking at this moment for precision strikes. Israel is focused on inflicting maximum damage. On the agenda is a plan to wipe out Hamas and also to try and get to Hamas's tunnel network. If Israel achieves its aims, the question, of course, is what will a post-war Gaza look like, and who will govern the land that is completely in ruins at this moment as we speak? Now, on the other end, Hamas launched its Operation Al-Aqsa Storm with three major aims. One is to punish the Israelis for what the Palestinians have been describing as illegal occupation. This is something that has been a view that is considered and held by the United Nations as well. Secondly, to denounce any Arab normalization with the state of Israel. And thirdly, to secure an exchange to free its political prisoners who are currently being held in Israeli jails. The hostage situation is going to be pretty key to understand Hamas's strategy. Anywhere from 200 to 250 people are currently in Hamas's custody. The group wants to set up a prisoner exchange. At this moment, Israel has not indicated, at least formally and publicly, that it wants to negotiate for the release of the Israeli hostages in Hamas's custody. Now, this kind of a bargain is something that Hamas has done in the past. Israel has negotiated in the past to get its hostages released. In 2011, remember this, in 2011, Israel negotiated with Hamas and freed 1,027 Palestinians in exchange for one Israeli soldier who had been captured by Hamas. Now, there are currently 5,200 political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners, who are held in Israeli prisons. Many of these political prisoners do not even have a charge against them. Out of these political prisoners, believe it or not, Israel has also imprisoned at least 170 children and 33 women. About 554 of them are said to be serving life sentences. 1 in every 5 Palestinians has been arrested and charged at some point of time in his life. Experts say that this war will reduce innocent people to bargaining chips. The seizure of so many hostages suggests that Hamas has a plan, a clear-cut plan, and the group has also said that a prisoner exchange will not be discussed until the war ends. The Hamas's future can, of course, have two versions: one where it is able to hold its ground in Gaza, and secondly, it is forced to reside in one of its alliance lands. Both could most definitely change the way West Asia looks like at this moment. But a lot of questions are being asked about what the Israeli strategy at this moment is, and can this strategy be even effective? And to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is likely to happen from here on, we're being joined by Mr. Giorgio Cafiero, who's a CEO at the Gulf State Analytics and also a professor at the Georgetown University. And he's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor, this is a question that a lot of people want to know at this point of time. It is 13 days since the hostilities broke out, 11 days since the crippling siege on Gaza. People at this moment want to know at what point of time will humanitarian aid be allowed to enter into Gaza? Do you think the conditions now are right that humanitarian aid will be allowed to enter in?
Unfortunately, I think probably there is no reason to think that Israel's very horrific and intense military campaign will stop anytime soon. I think given the magnitude of the October 7 incursion that Hamas waged into southern Israel, I think the Israeli leadership is under a lot of pressure domestically within Israel to keep on pounding the infrastructure in Gaza. Eventually, the dust will settle. Eventually, there will be some form of a ceasefire in one form or another, but we're not there yet. And I'm not expecting any ceasefire, which would be absolutely necessary for the humanitarian groups to come in and begin doing their work effectively. I don't see that happening anytime soon, and that's unfortunate.
At this moment, do you think Israel has a clear strategy on how to get back the captives, the hostages that Hamas has taken into custody? Because what we are seeing at this moment is only a relentless air campaign to bomb as many targets as possible in the Gaza Strip. Israel claims that these are all Hamas targets, but from the horrific visuals that are coming out, what is clear is that the collateral damage in terms of civilians who are losing their lives appears to be tremendous. Does Israel have a clear strategy as this war progresses?
Israel does not seem to have any sort of a realistic end game right now. Again, going back to October 7th and how that impacted Israel, that was an incursion that very much traumatized Israel. The Israelis are not used to suffering those kinds of attacks. The Israelis are accustomed to living in sort of a high-tech fortress where they're protected from groups in Gaza and elsewhere. So, like I said, Israel is in a very traumatized state right now. And the Israelis are really seeking revenge. They're seeking to impose collective punishment on the 2.3 million people in Gaza. I'll remind your viewers that half of those people are children.
Absolutely.
Israel is focused, like I said, on revenge in punishing not just Hamas, but punishing 2.3 million human beings in Gaza. But when we get to these questions about what's the end game, like I said, it's clear that Israel simply doesn't have one.
Right.
Okay, so let's just assume that Israel can wipe out much of the Hamas infrastructure, much of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. What comes next? Do you think that all of a sudden...
That actually brings me to the next question. Since last Friday, Israel has been talking about a potential ground offensive. It's mobilized an estimated 360,000 soldiers and reservists. We've been waiting since Friday evening. Today is Thursday now. It's almost about a week, but the ground offensive hasn't begun. What do you think is holding the Israelis back?
Well, it would be a very risky move. I personally do think that there will be a ground invasion, but I would assume that there are intelligent people in positions of authority in Israel who are contemplating the risks of that. There's no doubt that if Israel launches this ground incursion into the Gaza Strip, they could inflict a tremendous amount of damage on the people of Gaza and Hamas as an armed group. But there would also be an incredibly stiff resistance from the Palestinians on the ground. These are very urbanized areas, and there would be many Israelis who would get killed in such an operation. I don't know how much of a death toll the Israeli government and Israeli society thinks is bearable, but if they're being realistic, they need to understand that many and the IDF would lose their lives trying to reoccupy Gaza on the ground.
Right. Now, Professor, Israel has blamed Hamas for the violence that has broken out, but, there is no Hamas in the West Bank. And the information that is coming in is that there is violence that's also broken out in the West Bank. 7 Palestinians have been killed. What actually is going wrong here?
Well, obviously, the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis goes back, far before the establishment of Hamas in the 1980s. If Hamas disappeared tomorrow somehow, there would still be a conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Right. I think what is Israel's tactic now, and this is a tactic the Israelis have had for decades, is to try to pin all the blame on one actor that the West can see as extremely problematic or extremist or rejectionist, and just say that the conflict comes down to this one actor on the other side. Today, it's Hamas. In the past, it was Arafat, or it was Egypt's Jamal Abdel Nasser. But that's always Israel's effort, is to pin the blame entirely on one single malign actor.
I think that's the nub of this issue. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us and getting us all those insights. It remains to be seen as to what, of course, happens in the next 24 to 48 hours, because the key question, of course, is, will humanitarian aid, now be allowed to pass through the Rafah crossing, or will there be some roadblocks which, of course, spring up? And it's still not clear as to what Israel's end game in this war at this moment is. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.